beverage. So, yeah. Think we're ready. Hey everyone, this is Derek. I am a Dildo-smith and I am... Oh, jeez, I just blew my opening. Man, this is live, so let's start over. Hey everyone, my name is Derek and I am a Dildo-smith. I am the creator of Amavidia and I make dildos every day. I'm here to do the weekly AMA, Ask Me Anything. This is Ask a Dildo-smith, where I answer your questions about all things relating to dildos, lubes, dildo making, or anything else that might come up. Yeah. So I blew the opening. I think it's the first time I've actually blown it completely and had to start over. But that's okay. It happens. All right. So we have a few things to get through tonight. I hope to get through all of it fairly quickly, but there's going to be quite a bit of web browsing that needs to be done, and I want to make sure that I get everything in there. This week we are finally back into production. We had to shut down for about 2 weeks because of the ice and sub-zero temperatures that happened around here. Literally, we were breaking 120-year-old records around here. I think the temperatures got down to -7 Fahrenheit. By the way, that's Fahrenheit. -7 Fahrenheit with wind chills around -30 or so. And just to give you a sense, we get down to single digits around here every year. That's not too bad. But I can't remember the last time we broke 0. So it was crazy. Ended up shutting down the studio on Tuesday of last week because, well, basically the water lines were getting ready to freeze. So we went ahead and shut it all down. Cut off the water to the building and hoped for the best. And on Friday, I think it was, we finally got back into the building. Say finally. Actually, I'd been back in a couple of times to check on everything, but we finally got back into the building on Friday in order to try to get things back into production. And turned on the water, and we had 4 broken water lines. So we had to bring in a plumber, got them in on Saturday morning, got those fixed. And as of Saturday afternoon, technically we are ready for production. But it's going to take us a couple of days to kind of get everything back in order, make sure that we've got all the orders in the queue and all of that. So that was my week. It was kind of stressful. Technically I was off. You know, when you're self-employed, you're never really off. So that was the way that my week started. And I think one of the things that we did last week, all these weeks have been blurring together for the last couple. Last week we did the art of business, I think it was, pricing creativity. That's something that was actually fairly popular. And so we may come back and touch on that again. It was a little bit of a high level perspective of pricing, etc. So definitely something to go back and take a look at if you are interested in such things. I just realized I only have one of my cameras going. The week before we did Etsy, why you should and shouldn't use it, and I was actually really happy with that. So, you know, there's a couple of episodes to go back to if you're interested. You know, if you like what we do here, there's usually some kind of button or something that you can hit that lets me know that you like what it is that we do. So if there's a like button or something, hit that. You can also hit the subscribe button on YouTube, and I think Twitch has one as well. So you can hit those things, and that really just kind of makes me feel better. So I think that that brings us up to date. I do want to throw a quick shout out to Uranoscopes. They were very helpful this afternoon in testing out my new setup for bringing guests on. So hopefully I'm going to start scheduling guests again by the end of this month. Maybe next weekend we'll have somebody scheduled. I've got about a month and a half, 2 months worth of guests scheduled. So hopefully we can get them in and get the system up and running again. Because I love having those conversations with folks that are in the industry and making toys as well. All right. So let's see. I think I'm going to kind of stall here for a minute and make sure that I kind of have things the way that I want them. And we can talk about what it takes to get started as a dildo-smith. And there are a lot of things that go into it. And I want to make sure that I have gummy bears. George was very nice and very kind to bring me gummy bears. So I want to make sure that we have a chance to kind of get through as much of it as possible, but there are so many different parts of it that can be very difficult to make sure that we cover all the bases. So as I'm running through this, if there are any questions, definitely throw them into the chat and let me know. So first off, I think there's a question that has to be asked of whoever is thinking about doing this. And the first question is why? And to me, that means, do you want to do this for yourself? Or do you want to do this as a business? And those have two very different answers. And I'm going to try to jump in here. I forgot that I wanted to bring this in, but there are kits that you can get. Let's see if I can find one here. I usually do it on Amazon just because they're so easy to find things. But there are if you just want to do it as a kind of an experiment, just to see if you even like doing it, one of the things that you can use is the Clone a Willy kit, and you can get them on Amazon for about $70 or so. So it's not a huge investment, but it's going to be it's going to be a one-off kind of event. You're not going to be able to go into production off of a Clone a Willy kit. So it's, like I said, it's an easy way to get started. It's an easy way to test out whether or not you do this. The second route is if you want to go into this as a business. And if you want to go into it as a business, there are a lot of things that you really need to think about, and expenses and equipment that you really have to consider. I think the first thing that we're going to talk about, let's see if I can get the browser to work here. Yay, it does. And my mic still works. This is one of the things that I always mess up, is that I switch over to the browser and I forget to bring my mic along with me. But you'll want to go, again, there's kind of two routes to go. One is the hand sculpting method, and you can pick up some Sculpey from Amazon or Michael's or any of your local craft shops. By the way, I'm going to have links to all the different products and everything that I mentioned. I'll have links to those in the show notes. So when we get done, I'll go back, throw links in there so that you can actually find the things that I'm talking about. The Sculpey is a really good way of kind of getting your hands in there and getting started. So something that you might think about trying, and I think couple pounds of Sculpey is going to run you $20 or so. You can jump into getting some Sculpey and getting it in your hands so that you can actually get a sense of, you know, how this material works. I want to check something here. There we go. Mic up just a bit. So you can get the Sculpey, and you can actually, the nice thing about it is that it doesn't harden immediately, and so you can work with it for hours, days, weeks even. And it doesn't really harden until you throw it in the oven. So you can get your hands on there, you can get the Sculpey going, and you can figure out if and how your designs are going to work. And as you have progress along this path, you're going to get a sense of what's going to work and what's not. And that's what we're trying to figure out in these first steps. So grab yourself some Sculpey and start carving, sculpting, etc. I will say, pro tip, if your Sculpey sculpture is thick and say more than an inch in diameter, you're going to want to break it. You're going to want to cook it off in a couple of different sessions, so that here's what's going to happen is that if your Sculpey is too thick, too girthy, you've got more than an inch in diameter, it's going to crack. And so then you're going to end up having to go back and fill in your cracks and things like that. So take a minute and build it up and understand what it is that you're going to end up with and some of the things that you're going to have to deal with at the end. Lord's telling me to take a breath, so I think I've gotten kind of excited here. Now, if you are more electronically and computer inclined, you can go the 3D modeling route, and you can go with, let's see if I can find, you can go with, there's Sculptris. If I can find that real quick. Sculptris has been pretty much, it's been discontinued. They haven't been supporting it for several years, but it's a great way to start to get a sense of how 3D modeling works. The other option from the same company is Zbrush, and that is by Pixelogic. Let's see if I can bring that up. Zbrush is great for if you're doing organic shapes, and the software Zbrush is going to run you. You can get their Zbrush Core. They have Sculptris Pro. I'm gonna have to look into that. I didn't know they had done that. But you can get Zbrush Core for, I think it's $295. Oh, it's only $179 now. Okay. You can get into ZBrush for $179. And I realize that sounds like a lot, but when you look at the full version of ZBrush, it is $900. So, you know, having this core version for $179 is not actually that bad. The other nice thing about it is that if you are to upgrade to ZBrush, the full version, they'll give you credit for your original purchase against this $895. I think they give you 150-ish credit against that. So, you know, this will be down to about $650 or so. But if you are doing organic shapes, then ZBrush is excellent. Let's see, I think they have, it's actually designed for doing very high-end renderings, and there's some beautiful work in here. But all of these things were created with ZBrush, and it is it's kind of the standard that I would recommend. The other one is Blender, and Blender is an excellent option. It's free, it's open source. You can jump into it and download it and just play with it. I have heard recently that the 292 version is really, really good. So it's not something that I use. I actually use ZBrush. Blender just doesn't work for my brain, and so I never got into it. But I have heard some really good things about version 2.92. So you have to have one of these pieces of software, either Blender or ZBrush, and maybe even Sculptris, that you can create your 3D models from. From there, you're going to end up going into some kind of physical form, and that's going to be a 3D printer of some sort, most likely. Now, I personally like the Prusa printers. They are just, how do I put this? I've had other 3D printers and never had a problem with my Prusa. It is so easy to use that it just always works. It's kind of like, it's like having a Volvo. You know, you go out, start it, you know it's going to start up every time, and the Prusa is going to work every time. It's not inexpensive. You know, we're looking at about $750 for the unassembled version. Now, if you want to actually have them build it for you and ship it to you, it's about $1,000. But if you're fairly handy with a screwdriver, you can build one fairly easily. Might take you a day or two to get through it. But, you know, the Mark III S Plus is running for about $750. Now, the one limitation that you should always be looking at, one thing that you should be considering, and I wish I could highlight this better, is the build volume. Maybe I can zoom in. I can. Yeah, it's a little bit better. But here it tells you what the build volume is. And this one has a build volume of about 10 inches by 8 by 8. And the height of it, the highest point, is about 8.3 inches. So as long as you're not doing anything that's over 8.3 inches, I would say actually 8 inches. If you're not doing anything over 8 inches tall, you should be fine. You want to give yourself just a little bit of room at the end there. But if you're doing anything bigger than that, then the Prusa is actually going to be a limiting factor for you. There are ways of cutting your models, and then you can print them in pieces and then assemble them from pieces that you print off of a smaller printer. But the other option is going with a larger printer. Creality. It's Creality3dofficial.com. Creality has I think it's their Ender series is pretty good. The Ender 3 Pro is kind of the entry-level version, and you're probably going to be looking at the 3D Max, which is about $350. The only reason that I hesitate on, it's my personal preference, and it's the designs that I do, and you got to remember that when I talk about these things, I'm talking about it from my perspective, and that means that it comes with my own biases and everything else. So, you know, I'm looking at the Ender 3 Max, And it's about half the price of the Prusa, and it will print up to about 15 inches. So if you're doing something that's over 8 inches, then this is a great option. I will say that the folks that I have talked to that have had Ender or Creality printers is that they tend to be a little bit finicky. And so you might have more problems with a Creality. And like I said, the Prusa has just been so awesome that I've never had a problem with a failed print. So those are kind of the two 3D printers that I would first think about. Now, those are filament printers, and so you're going to need filament to go with them. I will say that Hatchbox is a good filament. Sunlu is a good filament. The Silk series, these are really pretty, but they're good filaments. The PLA Plus is a good filament. These are all filaments that you're going to be using with your printer. And basically it comes off a spool and it gets melted and then shaped into, kind of extruded out like a pastry bag. And so you're going to be melting this, and the thing is that when you're using a filament printer, FDM printer, the resolution is not that great. You're going to lose details depending on how fine a detail you're looking at. You can lose details on them, but also the layer lines are something that you're going to see. And so that's kind of the downside of the FDM filament printers. So you're going to have layer lines and you're going to have a little bit of loss of resolution, which means that you're going to have to do post-processing, which is sanding and primers, and that's actually a whole episode unto itself, so I'm not going to get into it totally. There are things like I keep doing this, I keep forgetting about things, but there's a company called Smooth On, which if you're going to do silicone toys, then you're going to know Smooth On. But they have a product called XTC 3D, and it's a really nice way of getting rid of layer lines. It is probably not the easiest thing to work with, but it's something that you should probably have in the back of your pocket just in case you need it. It goes on over the surface and it smooths out all of the layer lines, which you can see really nicely on this skull. If they had any other examples, but they do a really good job with the XTC 3D, and it does a really good job of hiding a lot of those layer lines. And it just brushes on like, a painted primer or something like that. So anyway, so those are the FDM printers that you might consider. There's some filament that you might consider. If you are wanting something that has higher resolution, then you're going to want to look at the resin printers. And so this uses a completely different format for reducing those prints. It actually starts off as a liquid, and I can't remember if they actually show it in use or not, but it starts off with a liquid in the base here, and the LCD at the bottom exposes the resin to UV light. That UV light sticks to the platform that is actually up at the top. See it dropping down there, and it will print layer by layer, and you will get really good resolution with it. Now, the downside is that it takes a lot of post-processing in terms of going back with a UV light and doing a post-cure, and there are several steps that have to happen. I actually used a different printer, but very similar, and I had some problems where my silicone had cure inhibition, and it had to do with the resin that I was using. So if you go with a resin printer, you're going to have to do some experimentation, but I will say that the resolution that you can get on these is pretty phenomenal. They are not big. This one has a build volume of a total of about 8.9 inches. And what that means is that you're probably going to get about 8 inches total build height out of something like that. You've got to have support structures, and geez, I'm thinking about all the things that go along with it. Anyway, the resin printers are awesome for resolution, but they are their own beast, and they require a lot of post-processing, just like the FDM 3D printers. All right, so I want to catch up on my notes here. Let's see. Okay, there are some comments. All right. So I want to throw it out there and see if there are any questions. I know I've kind of thrown a whole bunch at you, and we haven't even got to the point where we're pouring silicone yet. So if there are any questions, comments, thoughts, or anything like that, throw them into the chat, and I'll make sure that I don't gloss over it. All right. So let's look at earlier I mentioned Smooth On, and it's just smooth-on.com, and they are a great source for materials. The first thing I want to point out is that right here where it says tin cure, you do not want to use this. Tin cure silicone is not body safe, and it is something that you cannot use. There's some science behind it, but the bottom line is that tin cure silicones release alcohols, and during the curing process they take, oh geez, I don't want to dive too far into it, but they take moisture from the air, and it's condensation cure. The moisture comes in, combines with the silicone, and it releases alcohols in the curing process. And those alcohols are not body safe. So you will never want to use a tin cure silicone. You only want to use a platinum cure silicone. And the reason it's called platinum cure is that it uses platinum as a catalyst to make the curing happen. Remember earlier when I said tin cure uses condensation out of the air, moisture out of the air? Platinum cure silicone does not. It uses platinum to make the curing process happen. So it's a bit more expensive. I don't know if you've priced platinum anytime recently, but it's fairly expensive stuff. So the platinum cured silicone is where you want to be. Now, there are several different versions of it from Smooth On, and before we get into everything else, we still have to make a mold. And so you're probably going to want to use something like either the Mold Star series or the Dragon Skin series or the EcoFlex series. And these are great silicones to use for making your mold. One of the things that you'll notice here is that there are 6 different versions of MoldStar. The primary differences being in the hardness category. You know, we have a 15A all the way up to a 30A. And then there's the pot life. A pot life refers to how long the silicone stays liquid before it congeals. So that's not even true. It is the amount of time that it can sit in a cup before it gets poured. So we have from 3 minutes down here in the 19T all the way up to 50 minutes in the MoldStar 15 Slow. So, you know, if you're looking for something that is going to give you a little bit of room to get your mold made, you're probably going to be wanting to look at the MoldStar 30 or the MoldStar 15. They'll give you about 45 minutes in a pot. And then the next thing is we have Fiona, who's decided to say something. The next thing we have is cure time, and this is how long it takes to cure once it's in the mold. And again, we have anything from 12 minutes up to 4 hours. So there's a lot of options here depending on your needs and how fast you want to move. Realistically, you know, if you're doing a quick and dirty mold of something that is very, very simple, the MoldStar 16 Fast at 6-minute pot life and a 30-minute cure time is a great option. You do have to move fairly quickly on that, but you'll figure it out fairly fast. So now you've got your mold made, and I've kind of skipped over a few steps, but you know, there's so much detail that could go into this. But if you look at the picture here, you can see this guy pouring this silicone into this plexiglass mold, then eventually comes out with this piece. There's a lot that goes into this that really really requires a certain amount of experimentation and a certain amount of failure, and it's something that you should probably account for. Should probably do a whole episode on making molds and stuff like that. So I'll tell George to make a note of that. Now, once we have gotten our mold made and we've pulled our master out of that mold, we have something that we can actually produce product out of. And you're probably going to be looking at maybe the Dragon Skin series or the EcoFlex series. If you're looking for something that is kind of squishy, you're probably going to end up in the EcoFlex series, because you've got anything from a 0010 up to a 0050. And I guess I should say that when you're looking at silicones, and this is a really good example here. Down here we have the 0010 versus a 0050, and then we have a 10A and a 30A. A 00 series is always going to be softer than an A series. So your 00s down here are going to be your softer silicones. Your A series up here is going to be your firmer silicones. Now, once you get beyond that, in a 0010, this second number down here, a 0010 versus a 0050, the lower number is going to be softer than the higher number. So a 0010 versus a 0050, they're going to be very different, and the 0010 is going to be much softer than the 0050. There's a crossover point at about 0075, where 0075 is equivalent to about an A0. Now, the A series has the same numbering system. So a 10A versus a 30A, a 10A is going to be softer than a 30A. If you're making adult toys, then you're probably going to be looking at something in the 0030, I'm going to highlight that, 0030, the 0050, or possibly in the 10A series. Those are probably going to be the most common that you would be using. The differences, as you see, there's 5 different 10As here, and the differences are in purely the pot life and the cure time. So if you need something that has a little bit longer pot life and is going to give you a little bit more time to get that pour done, you'd probably be looking at something like the 10 medium, the Dragon Skin 10 medium, and you're going to be looking at about a 5-hour cure time. If you can move fairly quickly, the 10 fast, that's the Dragon Skin 10. That's a number 10, not the word 10. It's the Dragon Skin 10 fast has about an 8-minute pot life and 75-minute cure time. So these are probably going to be the most common usage when it comes to making adult toys. And these are all Platinum Cure. Remember, we talked about Platinum Cure earlier. These are all going to be Platinum Cure silicones, body safe, etc. So this is the material that you're going to use. Now, one of the things that I should mention is that, the Dragon Skin and the EcoFlex are clear. So if you want color, then you're going to be looking at something like Silk Pig, and that's silk as in silicone. And you can use these with the Dragon Skin and EcoFlex silicones. And these will give you nice, solid colors. These are not going to give you marbling. They're not going to give you anything that is going to have any shine to it. These are going to be solid colors. So you would add these, and these actually go a really long way. But, there are, about 13 different colors here. So you've got a fairly good range, and that'll get you started. Now, the other thing that you can look at is, I messed this up because I had a link for it earlier, but I messed it. You can use something like a Mica Pigment, and I'm not going to recommend anything in particular here because there needs to be a lot of research done on each particular pigment that you're going to be using, but something like mica-based powdered pigment can be mixed into the Dragon Skin or the EcoFlex and produce some really pretty colors. So, we have, what is that, about 45 different colors here, 50 colors. And there's some really good options there. But generally speaking, I'm hesitant to make a blanket statement here, and just understand, I don't want to make a blanket statement when it comes to pigments. Generally speaking, most mica powdered pigments are going to be body safe. Now, the things that have to be considered are the materials that are used for the color, as well as the particle size. And this example that I've got up here the particle size looks pretty good. If you see something that is more glitter than powder, then you really should be taking a second to think about it. Those glitters are generally not going to be body safe. Now, the other thing I don't know about this particular example is I don't know what pigments or what materials they're using to create these colors. So reds are generally created from some form of iron oxide, and greens and blues are a little bit, how do I put this? The materials that are necessary to create greens and blues can often be toxic. And so these are colors that you should really dive into. What are they made of? And what chemicals are actually used to make those colors? So, and I realize I've kind of thrown an example up here, but the point is that mica powdered pigments can be a really good option. I want to look, actually, before I do that, I want to just see. There is another company, and I want to mention them specifically. I want to make sure that I don't have the picture. Darn it. I will pass on mentioning them specifically. So let's see. I would definitely look at what the manufacturer says about them. I'm trying to see, I can't quite see it, so I'm not going to mention them specifically. But there is a company that is fairly common amongst toy makers, and I don't want to say that. There is a pigment that can be easily be used, and it is not body safe. So definitely look into the manufacturer, and if they have an MSDS, material safety data sheet, look at it, see what the materials are and what's being used to make that. All right, got a question here. What do you think of the biodegradable glitters? My first impression is my first gut feeling. I don't have any experience with them, so I can't speak to them specifically. But biodegradable does not mean body safe. So that's the first thing. The second is that if the particle size is too large, then it can't be completely encapsulated by the silicone. And if those materials come in contact with the body, then you can't be 100% sure that even though it's biodegradable, that it's body safe. Now, let's just say that those biodegradable glitters dissolved or degraded out of the surface of the silicone, so you didn't actually have any of the glitter sticking out, and it just dissolved and degraded away. Well, now you have pockets on the surface of the toy itself, and what that means is that now you have places for bad things to grow, and while it's not horrible, it's not optimal. You could still bleach it, and you could still boil it, and you could be reasonably sure that it would be sanitized. But once you have created pockets for things to grow, then that is, as I like to say, suboptimal. So my first impression is that I wouldn't want to use them in the beginning, but yeah, I can foresee some issues with those. So I mentioned the different pigments. All right, so we have a mold, we have the silicone that we're going to use, and we have pigments. Now, once you mix up your silicone with your pigment, you have mixed in a bunch of air. And so now you have to vacuum out, you have to eliminate that air from the material itself. And so you're going to need some kind of a vacuum chamber. So I kind of pulled up just a quick list here. These are some basic vacuum chambers that you could use. There are kits that come with a vacuum pump as well as a chamber. I hesitate to recommend something like that because the question is, how long is it going to take to create a vacuum inside that chamber with a given pump? So you have a chamber here and you have a pump, but if it takes 10 minutes for that particular pump to create a vacuum within that particular chamber, then you have to compare that against your pot life. So if it takes 10 minutes to create a vacuum and you've got a pot life of 8 minutes, then it's not going to work. Now you're looking at a silicone that has either a 15 or 20 minute pot life minimum, or 30 minute down here in the EcoFlex series. So when you're looking at the chambers themselves, I would generally buy a chamber by itself, and I would look at probably a 3-gallon or a 5-gallon chamber, and whether it has the valve on the front or the top doesn't really matter. I think that I can see pluses and minus, positive and negative on both scenarios. The trick is that if the valve is on top and you release the pressure, then the air is going to rush in through this center valve right here. That's going to go straight down. And if your silicone is directly underneath that, you're going to drive air directly into the silicone that you just tried to pull the air out of. So one like this that has one of these two that has the valve on the side, then it would be a little bit more forgiving. So you would need a chamber, and then you would need a vacuum pump. I would probably be looking at something that is going to pull, like this one here that pulls 5 CFM. That's 5 cubic feet per minute. And something like this one, along with, say, a 3-gallon or a 5-gallon tank, is going to be a pretty good match. So you'll be looking at getting a vacuum pump. And you look at some of these other ones, they have 3 CFM. Let's see, this 12 CFM. This one's really fast. Wow, 12 CFM. That you could probably pull a vacuum on something like this in about a minute or so. But, there's a price difference. It really just depends on how much you want to spend. So there are packages that you can get that combine them, but I would probably want to buy them separately, just so that I know how many CFM I'm going to be pulling. Oh, there was a question. Let me come back to that. Is there some sort of sealant you can use in the finishing process? Or is the product purely silicone and pigment? That question, I don't know who asked it, but if you can clarify for me, when you say sealant of the finishing process, are you talking about on the silicone itself or of the master? Let me know. Let's see, coming in on the chat here. Okay, of the silicone itself. No. Generally speaking, I would say no. There really isn't any kind of sealant you can use. And I'll leave it at that. There's a lot that could be said about that, but I'll leave it there. You really have to make sure that your silicone is completely bubble free, and you got to make sure that your surface is nice and pristine unto itself. Let's go back here. Okay, so we have a vacuum pump, we have a vacuum chamber. You'll end up dropping your mixed silicone into the chamber. You'll connect your pump, you'll pull a vacuum. You probably have, you might have seen videos of silicone under vacuum, and if you have, it's actually kind of interesting. I think I have a video of it. Let's see if I can pull one up here real quick. But what you're going to be looking for is you want to make sure that all of the air is pulled out of the silicone. And let's see if I've got this here. Bring this up. Here, this is a bit of silicone that's under vacuum right now. And if you look real closely, you can see that it's actually expanding and it's coming up the cup. But what we're doing is we're pulling all of the air out of it. And then you'll see this kind of collapse that happens. Should happen here in a few seconds. But you'll see this collapse that happens. And when that happens, you've probably pulled out about 90% of the air. And you'll want to let it sit under vacuum for a little bit long. I think I actually did this one under slow motion, but it's, do I have another one? No, I don't. But you want to make sure that you pull all of the air out in order to make sure that you don't end up with bubbles inside of your silicone. When you pour that into the mold and you end up with bubbles inside of the product itself, then you've created a place for bad things to grow, bacteria, etc., mold, things like that. And so you really want to make sure that you pull all of that air out. Now, I think I saw another question pop up. Is the product purely silicone and pigment? Yes. There are additives that you can add, but they are silicone based. Smooth On has one that they call a slacker. And what that is it reduces the firmness of a given silicone. So you can take something that's a A10 and reduce it down to, say, a 0050 or maybe even a little bit below that. So there are additives that you can add to it, but they are silicone based. So ultimately what you're looking at is a product that is purely silicone and pigment, and that's it. And hopefully no air. I'm hearing a lot of things to buy. This sounds expensive. Yeah, you remember at the beginning when I talked about whether this is going to be a hobby or a business? Yeah, it's going to be fairly expensive. I didn't even show the prices on the dragon skin and such. Let's just look at some dragon skin medium. Actually, I'll pull up my supplier and show you what the prices are. But you know, if you're gonna buy dragon skin and you're gonna buy vacuum chamber and a pump and a 3D printer, you know, your first batch of silicone, you're going to be spending probably about $200 in silicone, plus we'll say $750 for a 3D printer. Call it $1,000 because you're going to buy filaments and things to go along with it. Vacuum chamber, pump, you're going to be looking at $1,700 to $2,000 just in your initial investment. So yeah, it's not inexpensive. If you're doing this as a business, then it's definitely something that you're going to have an upfront investment, and you're going to have to recoup that over time. Yeah, there was a question about how much was your initial investment in materials and what did you add along the way. I actually bought a few different 3D printers, so that was kind of the things that I bought along the way. I did a lot of experimentation with a bunch of different silicones. So I had, I probably tried 3 or 4 different silicones from various companies, trying to find a silicone that had the properties that I like. So the things that I added along the way were a couple of different printers, probably 4 different silicones. I have probably 100 different pigments in my pigment library at this point. You're going to spend probably $20 per pigment. Buy it in decent volumes. You're going to pay about $15 to $20 per pigment. So, you know, do the math. Got probably $1,000 in pigments. And then there's all the various supplies that go with it, the cups. Geez. We had some problems with blue powdered pigments. The pigments that we could find that were body safe and that we wanted to use in terms of color had a tendency to clump. And so we ended up having to create our own liquid pigments out of those powdered pigments. And so that took supplies and stuff. Let's see. Well, some more questions. A reminder from George that we're at about almost an hour. And yeah, George feels bad when she tells me that, but I have to know because I could talk for hours about this, and I want to keep it fairly tight. This was from, okay, what was the questionably safe pigment? Zinc sulfate illuminate, silicate illuminate, or chromium oxide? The way that I'm going to answer that is that I don't want to give a broad answer in terms of a specific chemical. And the reason is that if I say that a particular chemical is safe and somebody ignores the other components, then I would feel bad if they actually ended up using that product. The product that I'm thinking about is one, and it actually says on the bottle, it says not body safe. And so I think it says, I remember it says that it's not body safe. And so until I can find a image of that label that says not body safe, I'm going to hesitate before I tell you what that company is. But I don't want to say a specific chemical either, because if I say that one of these is body safe, then somebody might look at that and see just that chemical and ignore the other ones that might be in the mix. What I would recommend is working with a supplier that provides MSDS, material safety data sheets, for every pigment that they create. And so that may limit you to particular vendors, or you might end up having to do some research to find those vendors. But I would definitely suggest looking for one that has MSDS documents on every pigment. The good vendors will also tell you if they are FDA approved, and if the FDA has approved them, for what have they approved it? Some will be safe for the lips and eyes. Some of them will be safe for the skin, but not the lips. And when I say FDA approved, I'm talking about cosmetic pigments that are used for cosmetics. And so that is something that I would look for in a provider. Somebody was asking about reputable supplier. Let me see if I can find the one that I'm thinking of here. I realize there's a little bit of dead air here, but I want to make sure that I give you a good example. Okay, so I'm not recommending this company, but I will say that tkbtrading.com, TKB does a pretty good job of identifying products, and I'm just going to use one here, this Dublin green here, and you know, it's actually kind of a nice bluish green, and it says okay for use, and it's specifically USA and EU, and it'll tell you whether it's safe for lips, eyes, nail polish, skin, etc., whether it's vegan, MP safe. And then diving into it more specifically, if you go down here to the documents, they'll actually give you the MSDS for that particular pigment. Now, that's a good place to start. In this particular instance, I would look at something like this, where it says California Prop 65 warning. This product may contain trace chemicals, being known to cause cancer, birth defects, etc. So, you know, something like this, while, you know, it's FDA approved for lips, eyes, nail polish, and skin, as well as EU approved, I would have a little bit of pause because of the California Prop 65 warning that is attached to it. They even identify titanium dioxide specifically. But then, you know, we're going back down here into the MSDS, the material safety data sheet, and they'll tell you, you know, it's got iron oxide in it, it's got titanium dioxide in it, it's got tin oxide in it. It'll give you the pH value and all these things. And that will give you a really good basis to start making some choices off of. So, yeah, there was a question. Reputable supplier. You can do your own research in terms of a reputable supplier, but I think TKB is a decent place to look if you want to get a sense of the information that you should be looking for. So, all right. I want to pause here for a second and catch up on my notes and grab a beverage. There were a few questions at the beginning I wanted to go back to. I apologize for the dead air. Okay. All right, I will come back to those in a few minutes. All right, so we are at the point where we have our silicone, we have our pigment, we've mixed it, we've put it in the vacuum chamber, we've vacuumed it out, and poured it into the mold that we made earlier. Before we pour it into the mold, we have to use a mold release. There's a product called Ease Release 200. This is another smooth on product. This is really good release agent for separating silicone from silicone. Silicone doesn't stick to much of anything except for itself. And if you were to pour silicone into a raw mold, it would weld itself. It would actually stick to the mold and you would never be able to separate them. A mold release like Ease Release 200 is an excellent option. It's actually really good. So your mold, and then you have your silicone. You've poured your silicone into the mold. It has been properly released. And now you're going to sit there and wait until it cures. And I want to show you an example of, let's see if I can pull this up. I think that worked. Yeah, these are decent examples. I'll show you what my molds look like. And you remember earlier we talked about a 3D printer? 3D printers are good for something beyond printing your masters. These frames I actually printed with a 3D printer. These are my molds, and they sit in these frames. I use glove molds. Some people use block molds. Remember earlier when I talked about how building molds was a whole topic unto itself? Yeah, we're talking about glove molds here. And so these are, three examples of stands that I 3D printed with the molds that I use. And, here's a little bit different version of it. But once you've poured these and you've got silicone sitting in them, they're going to sit around for about anywhere from an hour to 4 hours, depending on what your time is. And so, yeah, once it's fully cured, it's actually fairly simple. You grab it, you pull it out of the mold. There's a little bit of a technique to that. You just break it loose at the top, and then you can kind of work a bubble around the mold itself, and you can separate the product from the mold, then put out. And then, do I have a picture here? I think I do. This was early on when I was just experimenting and playing with different color palettes and things like that. Then once you pop it out, you've got to wash it. And, silicone toys are dishwasher safe, of course. So you could drop them into the dishwasher and give them a nice rinse. All right, so that gets us to the point where you have a product in your hand and something that you could actually use Etsy or not use Etsy to sell, which there's an episode a couple weeks ago about using Etsy or not. So yeah, that's pretty much my, it's not an in-depth, it's kind of a 101 on the products and the materials and the equipment that you would need to get started. All right. Like I said earlier, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. George will get them to me. This was actually a follow-up kind of from last week about pricing and such. This is a question. I want to ask, how much do you feel comfortable adding to the price of a toy above material costs? Should new makers start pricing lower and increase prices as they become more skilled? Thank you for all the work and podcast. Love your work. You're welcome. I actually enjoy this, so it's not a big imposition on me. How much do you feel comfortable adding to the price of your toy above material costs? Well, if you listened to last week's episode, you'll know that I really don't care what the material costs are. I want to know what is the value to the customer. And so don't concern yourself with the material costs. Concern yourself with what would the customer think of the value of this particular toy. And the second part of that question was, should new makers start pricing lower and increase prices as they become more skilled? You will not know that you have become more skilled until long after you have. Your customers will identify your skill long before you do. So my answer to that is that if you are selling well, then raise your prices, and your perspective of your skill will never be accurate. It'll always lag well behind. There's imposter syndrome and a lot of things that go along with that. So yeah, that's my quick and dirty answer to that. There was a question about color theory, and I want to wait on that one because I think that deserves its own conversation. And it's a little bit abstract, and I think it requires some preface that is going to take a little bit longer to talk about than we can here as a follow-up question. All right, George, were there any other questions? All right. So, I forgot to do, you remember earlier when I completely borked my intro? One of the things I forgot to do was I would be completely remiss if I never mentioned my website, which is www.amavidi.com. That's AMAVIDI.com. Because we have a website. Oh, you can also find us at amavidi.etsy.com. Things that we have coming up. I am going to give everyone here on the stream a quick preview of the drop that we're going to do this week. So I went through and did a bunch of product shots, and so these are all toys that are going to be released this Friday. I think we decided on. I think we're doing this Friday. We're going to do a drop, and all of these are going to be released on Friday afternoon, evening-ish. I haven't decided on time yet, but this one up here, this one, I think this is crazy. This was a 7-color pour, 8-color pour. But all of these are going to be released on Friday, and we've got so many. I want to say there's probably about 60, 75 pieces that are going to be released. Look at that. I mean, that's just gorgeous. So, some of these are kind of different. This is my favorite little kind of Cthulhu Lovecraftian, and then this was just gorgeous as well. There's going to be a lot of parabolicas in there, and yeah, I think there's going to be some really good options out there. So that was a little preview of what we've got coming up. Also, I think I want to do just a quick shout out to Patreon. We do have a Patreon. The one that I'm really excited about is the Flourish Patron, just because I like making toys, and this is a way for me to know that I'm going to be sending a toy to somebody that is actually going to enjoy it. $40 a month, and you get a free toy every month, which is generally about half price. If you're outside the United States, we do have an option. It's $60. The difference there is just totally the price of postage. But yeah, those are the things there. Now I want to check and see if there are any more questions. I don't see any immediately. You can always drop a question into my direct messages on Twitter, which is at Amavidi Studios. So you can jump on there and get that information to me. So yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap it up for this evening. You guys have a good night. Bye.